And we are just hours away from the third and final presidential debate. Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump will go head-to-head right here in Las Vegas later this evening, and it won't all be about the recent controversies. At least that's what a lot of Americans hope. They will make their case on a series of issues, including the Supreme Court, the economy, and immigration. Here with me now is the Director of Hispanic Communication at the Republican National Committee, Helen Aguirre Ferre. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for inviting me.
All right, so this is something that's interesting. People certainly care about immigration,
Sure.
but both candidates have not been talking about that issue and many others because they've been addressing the controversies within their respective campaigns. Do you expect that today we will hear more from Donald Trump, for example, about his immigration plan?
I think it would be great if Donald Trump would focus on the issues that really have made his campaign interesting for a number of voters. And if you talked about jobs and economy, so when you look at where he is today with Latino voters in Nevada, he has a really strong following. He has 33%, which is enormously high when you take into account that there have been immigration points that he's brought up that have been controversial, to say the least. So when you look at that, you realize that there are a lot of issues that are really affecting the pocketbook, security, national security, that really make a huge difference. And I think it would behoove him, it would be great for him to be able to come back and focus on that and leave aside some of those controversies.
Let's get into a sort of a nuanced discussion about the immigration issue. I think it's fascinating to me that that people are somehow curious about the fact that Hispanics and Latinos in America may be supportive of the Republican Party. That's always been the case, but with this particular candidate, Donald Trump, the question is, why are they supportive of somebody who has said some of the things that he has said? In other words, he's talked about Mexicans as being rapists and drug dealers. He's talked about having a vetting plan that includes, religious affiliation. So where does that support come from? How are people able to reconcile the rhetoric with the real issues that Republicans have put forth on a platform that a lot of Hispanics and Latinos agree with?
Well, I think that Latinos feel that they have been played by both parties. Right. And so they're looking at this on a very different level, and let's be very pragmatic. So the Democrats tell you that they love you and they want, comprehensive immigration reform, which was the promise President Obama made for his first year of his administration. And after 2 years where he had a veto-proof Congress, he didn't do any of that. So I think that has an effect. And when you look at Latino support for Hillary Clinton, although higher than for Trump, notably, you see that it's much lower than it was for President Obama. And you don't necessarily see that damaging effect down ballot, down ticket as well. So I think there's this focus of immigration is important, and it should be important to all
Right.
Americans, not just to Hispanics. But you know what? So's good jobs, so's economy. How about, looking at renegotiating some of these trade deals? Are they helping us? Are we at a better advantage? You look at healthcare and the cost of healthcare. You look at, going up 41% in Colorado. You look how it's going up here in Nevada as well. It's huge. And so I think those pocketbook issues are really playing a big part. And as long as Donald Trump says, I apologize for words that I have said, this is not, who I am, which he did. I think, people say, let's talk about the issues, and which is why I'm hoping he really focuses on the issues. And quite frankly, Hillary Clinton, too, because we really don't know where she stands on a number. We don't know what her public side is, because apparently she has a private side and
Right.
a private voice, too.
Now, you're referring to some of the WikiLeaks that have come out that have said that she has these two different sides to her. I think a lot of people believe that, a lot of politicians do, but when Donald Trump says that he wants to build a wall, do those Latino supporters of his agree that that's the kind of immigration policy and that Mexico is going to pay for it?
Well, when you look at any immigration component, national security component, there's always been some type of physical barrier. In 2007, it was called a fence. Now it's called a wall. And you put it wherever you can. You had, one of those that, that was done through technology. So there's always going to be some component to that. And for Latinos, that's not a big shock or surprise. But that's just a national security, a border security issue. That's not dealing with what to do with visas, what to do with people. We have a system right now where it makes it easier to immigrate illegally than to do it legally. So why don't we flip that? Why don't we make it easier to immigrate legally and make it harder to immigrate illegally. And I think that's at least that's a point where we should all agree.
All right, let me ask you about this. Trump has repeatedly made the claim that the election is being rigged, and you've got people, Republicans and Democrats, but a lot of Republicans saying this is our American democracy. You know, other countries, and I've reported from countries around the world where they do not have a transparent democratic process. When countries want to implement one of those processes, they look at the United States and say we should try to do what they're doing there. But on Monday night, Marco Rubio was asked about this, and I want to play what he said about that. Take a listen.
This election's not being rigged, and I'm explaining to you why it's not being rigged in Florida, and why I hope he stops saying that, why he should stop saying that. We have 67 counties in this state, each of which conduct their own elections. I promise you there is not a 67-county conspiracy to rig this election. Second, the governor of the state of Florida is a Republican who appoints the people that run the Division of Elections. Third, there's no evidence behind any of this, and so this should not continue to be said. And do I believe people should have confidence? Yes. And do I believe they should vote? Absolutely.
All right, Helen, you hear Senator Rubio there saying that the election is not being rigged. Other Republicans have said this is not happening. Why does he keep asserting that?
Well, you know, I think that when you look at, you know, the video that shows that, you know, Democrats have been trying to disrupt his rallies and incite violence, and and you put that element of uncertainty in
but
there.
That's not really rigging an election. I mean, that's campaign politics that happens on both sides, right?
Well, we haven't
people
seen,
hold up signs.
No,
and they go.
But what you've seen, the type of inciting of violence on in the Trump campaigns have been very different. So I think when you're looking at it, the rigging side, Democrats have said that there's been rigging of elections. Just ask anybody from Florida, and so they've always questioned, ballots and how it's done. But by and large, we are a country where democracy reigns, and we have to feel very proud of that. And I am more than certain that every state is doing their best to make sure that it's done and it's followed absolutely properly.
But it also sounds that when he says that the process is rigged, it's rigged if it goes against him. It's not if it works for him.
And I guess every candidate would probably follow that line and say that that's definitely the case. But I have total confidence, and I would agree with Senator Rubio, that we don't have a rigged system. That certainly what you may have is some occasional shenanigans, if you want. But by and large, we have a system that's absolutely clear and pristine, and that we have to always be vigilant to make sure that it stays that way. We don't want to, fall asleep on the wheel. But I don't think that that's an issue of great concern.
The concern, I think, for a lot of his supporters is that if he is saying that the system is rigged, then they say, well, we've already lost, and then they don't come out and vote. Is that a concern?
I don't know that that's necessarily a concern. I think that his voter base is a base that's going to really be very proactive and definitely inside, and they're definitely going to be getting to the polls. I think what it might suggest is that if he doesn't do so well in the polls, he can always fall back and say, well, I think they rigged the system. But by and large, I would agree with Senator Rubio.
And before I let you go real quick, you don't think that he will contest the election if he loses? In other words,
I don't know.
Because Kellyanne Conway, his campaign manager, was asked about that. She said that they'll accept the results. But Donald Trump is his own man. That's part of the reason he has such an appeal with so many people. What do you think? Well,
when you want to contest an election, it all depends on how close the election is, and if contesting in certain areas would make a difference in the final outcome. If it's a big poll, if it's 270 is the magic number that you need, because it's the Electoral College that we're really looking at. If it's something that makes a difference, that's a possibility. But I think, we're so far away. I really hope we don't go there, because
I
think we have to have confidence in our system and our process. But being vigilant all the time is always very important. It's part of democracy.
Helen Aguirre Ferre, thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate it.